When was the last time we went to Indonesia on an In My Mug? A very, very, very long time ago. But this week, we're off to Indonesia, to the Frinsa estate, for the Smallholders washed Sigarar Utang.
My name is Steve Layton, and I travel the world finding amazing and delicious coffee for you to drink at home. Some make coffee difficult to understand and complicated, but here it's my job to make it easy and fun and tell you what's in my mug.
The Frinsa estate belongs to Wildan Mustafa, the coolest name in coffee. I want to be called Wildan one day. And it's really quite a large coffee farm, 110 hectares, based in West Java, and about 150 kilometres from the Indonesian capital of Jakarta. As well as a farm, they have their own wet mill and their own dry mill, which is quite unusual for Indonesia. Like, it tends to be a lot of co-op based stuff, and it's one of the few farms we've come across. The lot you have today wasn't actually grown by Frinsa itself, but was selected by a selected group of farmers that work in the area, and they process the coffee for. The altitude is around about 1,300 metres above sea level, and the cultivars grown, I've never heard of these before in my life, is Sigarar Utang. Never heard of it, never heard of this varietal at all, but this is Indonesia. I know so little about Indonesia. Most of their coffees, like this one, are washed, which again is incredibly unusual for Indonesia. Most of them tend to be naturals, and it's dry fermented in small tanks for 15 to 18 hours before they're rinsed, and soaked underwater for another 12 hours. Never heard of this either, completely unusual. When it comes to drying, they mainly dry in the patios, but they are investing in more drying tables for the future. Currently, most of the coffee is pre-dried on beds for a day or two in greenhouses and then transferred to a patio. But with this investment, they're going to have more of those green beds so they don't have to take them off. And the reason they do this is drying can take up to 14 to 20 days, depending on rain during the harvest period. Frinsa are also invested in improving their farming techniques, with lots of new experimental varietals being planted in cooperation with World Coffee Research and the Coffee Research Station there. And they're also taking a methodical approach to tracking each of their lots so they can identify what's working, what isn't. Like keeping those notes is really, really important. And while we're talking about notes, why don't we focus on this week's tasting notes? So I want to focused on the tasting notes of this one, because this is such an unexpected Indonesian. Most Indonesians tend to be lots of base notes, lots of kind of like leather, kind of tobacco, tend to be darker roasted, tend not to have interesting flavours. This is so interesting. I want you to think apricot yoghurt. It sounds like a terrible tasting note, but when we stood on this table cupping all of the samples, we were just like, it just tastes like apricot yogurt. It's just crazy. Then it pulls back into a different place of a more classic Indonesian. So dark chocolate, digestive biscuit, and a little bit of we haven't had a shoulder for a while, of like a black pepper spice on the finish. It's such an interesting coffee for Indonesia. But it's such an interesting coffee for coffee in general. If you have tried Indonesians in the past and not liked them, please look at this with an open mind, because it is completely different. So Roaster Steve is going to talk to you a little bit about how we might roast this coffee. And really for me, it's a medium coffee. So you take it through first crack, and you take it to the introduction of second crack. And you're talking about the cusp of it, like really just before it gets going. And this is pretty typical of how you will treat most Indonesians' coffee. They need quite a lot of heat because they're quite a dense bean. And if you don't want it to drag out into a really long roast. I think that shorter roast, lots of heat, get it up there quickly, is what makes this kind of a really interesting and like more clean and crisp Indonesian than you would normally find. Let's get into this one. A clean Indonesian with interesting tasting notes. Who'd have thought it? Drinking from my Slovakia mug. Slovakia in the World Cup? They won't be by now, will they? as I said to you when I was smelling earlier and tasting earlier, this tastes of apricot yoghurt. It sounds ridiculous, but it really is apricot yoghurt, but has a classic Indonesian style to it. So has dark chocolate, digestive biscuit. And on the back, on the finish, it's like I've just cracked a black pepper on the back of my tooth and I'm like, it's like really got a spicy finish to it. It's the weirdest combination of flavours. I'm sure lots of you will disagree with me. Please tell me that you disagree with me. I'd love to hear. But I'm sure lots of you will agree as well. It is unique and it's a super clean, very well processed Indonesian and well worthy of being on In My Mug, and I'm very happy to share it with you. I don't think we've had one for about 150, 200 episodes, so it's about time we had another Indo on. Thank you very much for joining me as always. And do remember, life is too short for bad coffee. I'm doing a dynamic workout, it says on my watch. Heart rate must be up.